My fiercely independent mother, Veronique, was a force of nature. She was intelligent, witty, always ready to help others. She was the epitome of grace and strength with a dash of whimsy. Unfortunately, she struggled with her health for the majority of my life. I graduated from college when I was 21, and a few months later, my mother had a debilitating stroke. It robbed her of her speech, of her mobility, and partial hearing. She remained in a rehab hospital for about a month, and I visited it every day. But I couldn't help but think things would never be the same. Over time, her health ailments manifested themselves in such frightening ways. I'll never forget calling one day and having her tell me she forgot how to get home. Shortly thereafter, the doctors diagnosed her with Alzheimer's. She was in a perpetual state of anxiety as a result of this diagnosis, and my brother and I were devastated. We knew things would change and be different, but we never knew when. The caregiver journey can be solitary and arduous. In the earlier days of my caregiving, there was no best practices guide, no clear resource for me to understand how to properly be a caregiver. None of my employers had any elder care benefits, and to top things off, I was frequently traveling for work. I strived to give 100% of myself to my mother and to my profession. Exhaustion became my middle name. I've had some time to reflect on my 22-year-long caregiver journey. It's been about 11 months since my mother has passed. And in my reflections, I've thought about the emotional, the mental, the physical, and the financial cost of caregiving in this country. The cost is high. In the US, there are 41 million unpaid caregivers. Expect that number to continue to rise as our population ages. The estimated economic value of unpaid caregiver contributions in 2017 was $470 billion. It's a rather conservative number considering the complexity of care provided is not reflected. Business productivity losses total $25 billion each year due to unpaid caregiver responsibilities. I visited my mom as often as I could when I wasn't traveling for work. I made it to most of her doctor's appointments, even if I wasn't feeling well. I prepared for those appointments as if I was taking a graduate level test. I had copious notes, questions, all designed to ensure I was giving her the best possible care. On a good day, my day would start off at 6 o'clock in the morning. I'd work for about 9 to 10 hours and then find my way to my mother's and find her in a good mood, her sense of humor in full effect. On a bad day, she'd be angry, forgetful, agitated. And on a terrible day, she'd have a mini stroke or another neurological issue. As the years went on, my caregiving responsibilities increased. I became my mother's health proxy, and about a year later, her power of attorney. I managed everything: her finances, medical needs, her laundry, her grocery, her house cleaning, everything. And of course, I was her companion. Gradually, her health continued to deteriorate, but so did mine. I started having frequent bouts of pneumonia and bronchitis, and the excessive work travel exacerbated both of those. I've had 2 major surgeries, which have thankfully turned out to remove benign tumors. Would I do it again? Absolutely. My actions gave me priceless extra time with my mother. Though loving, my mother was difficult, and our extra time together allowed us both to clear the air. Our extra time together allowed me to plan a family reunion on her 81st birthday. Our extra time together resulted in gratifying visits to her nursing home, where we would birdwatch, look at ridiculous television, and of course, share dessert treats. Humanity is an interconnected ecosystem. If we want to maximize the benefits of this system, we have to do a better job taking care of one another. I'm sharing my story with you because I'd like you to take a closer look at the caregivers in your orbit. If we shift our mindset and work together, we will be able to reduce the cost of caregiving overall. There are 4 things we need to keep in mind when it comes to shifting our mindset. The first is being empathetic and sensitive when caregivers are sharing their story. The second is we can be proactive when it comes to looking for technology innovations, articles, or companies that are actually supporting caregiver causes. Third, if we are in the tech or creative industries, we can actually create a caregiver solution. I'm working on one right now that seeks to aggregate the financial, logistical, and healthcare education information for caregivers. And last but not least, we need to elevate the visibility of caregiver advocacy in corporate America. Does your firm offer elder care benefits? If not, talk with your representative and find out what's required to do so. The Family Medical Leave Act is a piece of legislation that entitles all employees to unpaid leaves of absence for care of a loved one or themselves. Every employee should be familiar with this, especially if they are caregivers. As I sit back and reflect on the before times during this pandemic, I remain optimistic. I hope we recognize we are not independent islands. We need each other. We need our doctors, our nurses, our health aides, our teachers, our farmers. We need our restaurants, our grocery stores. We need our colleagues, our friends, our families, our communities, and our churches. So let's be better. Let's strengthen our society and ensure that caregivers have the resources they need.
Hello. Hi. So, in college, I had the biggest crush on this beautiful curly-headed guy. We were both really involved in a Christian group on our campus, and we'd been friends for a while. But I began to take more notice of him when he started leading our Monday night prayer group. I can still see him sitting atop a desk in front of the classroom, all blonde and smart and cool, speaking insights into scripture and making my heart go flutter. He was wise and thoughtful and super cute and so funny. In addition to his scripture smarts, he helped write and act in skits that our student group performed at a weekly meeting on Thursdays. I'll never forget the skit he helped create and perform in that was rallying for Salvation Army volunteers. It was an SNL spoof of the cheerleaders, complete with singing and a choreographed dance to the 1979 hit, You Can Ring My Bell. It's actually still one of my favorite sketches of all time. So as you can see, I was truly smitten. However, dating in that time as a Christian was kind of tricky. Rules, like I shouldn't tell him how I feel, he needs to pursue me, and I have to wait for him to ask me on a date. So basically I had to wait for God to tell him to tell me that he was into me. It was very complicated. So even if I was brave enough to tell him what was in my heart, my Christian, dutiful brain was shutting it down. So one of the hilarious things that my crush would like to do was he would pretend to fall and trip into things. He and his best friend Michael would be walking along and not see the curb and then spectacularly pratfall all over the ground, to the shock and horror of those who were not in on the joke. The rest of us who knew what was up thought it was hilarious. So one afternoon, I'm playing Frisbee with a bunch of buddies, and of course my crush is there. And Michael, he goes running for the Frisbee, and he trips over a rock, and he splats in the grass. Well, good job. Well done. Well done. So he pops up, and he throws the disc at my crush, my curly-headed friend. He's just running for it. And then he catches, his foot kind of catches on the sidewalk, and he goes airborne. His curly locks just waving in the breeze. And he sort of balls up into this tight ball and then hits the sidewalk and right against a lamppost. Oh. So me, I just like start cheering and screaming and freaking out because that was the best stunt I had ever seen. But then I start thinking about the sound of skin scraping on concrete and the metallic cartoonish thunk of his head against the metal was probably not supposed to be funny. He wasn't faking. So by this time, everyone's rushed around him and they're making sure he's okay. He pops up. He seems fine. However, that evening at prayer, where's my beautiful man? He's not there. Turns out he shows up late with a cast on his arm. Well, enter my wise friend Helen. She knew I was really into this guy, but she also knew that I had to be discreet because. And so she suggests to me that I could really be a help to him in this time of need. Ha yes. So now's my chance to help God help my crush see that I am girlfriend material. So I was the one in my friend group that had the car, and I offered to drive him to all of his doctor's appointments, assuring him that my schedule was free and it was no problem at all. Really, my schedule was not so free, and it turned out to be a little bit of a problem because I ended up missing a few classes, and that was significant enough to drop my grade by like a whole letter. But anything for love, except being direct. I brought him ice packs and Advil, and I even like wrote this weird smiley face on his hand. I was really obvious. Then, finally, my prayers, my frantic schedule manipulation, and probably the fact that I was following him around like a therapy puppy finally paid off. Sean, honey, asked me on a date. And then he asked me on another date. And then another date. And then all the dates forever and ever till death do us part. That was 22 years ago. His arm's healed, but life has broken a hell of a lot in each of us these past 22 years. But that first break, it led to something unbreakable. Life is hard, and it could have crushed me, but it didn't, because I still have my crush.
As you can probably tell from my accent, I'm not American. And over time, I've had people ask me on multiple occasions, what brought you here? Isn't it hard being far away from your family? Don't you miss them? And my answer to them is that I don't need to be with my family to be close to them. I'm lucky enough that wherever I go, my family is with me. But let me tell you more about it, about my story. I am originally from Italy, and I come from a rather long tradition of immigrants. As far as I know, at least one family member from each generation for the past 3-4 generations moved to and started a new life in a different country. Just to give you an idea, I was actually born in South America. With my family, I relocated to Italy when I was just a baby. I grew up in Italy and now I'm here in the US. And honestly, I can't promise I'll stay here for too long. So I guess that the follow your dreams or the sky's your limit kind of way of life was almost ingrained in my brain since an early age, and not even intentionally. Growing up, I guess I just absorbed the family tradition. I also grew up in a very small family. It is small even considering the entire extended family, and for sure that's true for Italian standards. But the main reason is that the majority of my relatives still live in South America. So for me, any family traditions like Christmas, birthdays, any celebrations have always meant gathering with my mom, my dad, and my older sister. So we've always been really, really close. And again, it was never something that my parents actively taught us. It was never an obligation. I've never heard them say, oh, you have to spend time with us because family is important or anything like that. And with time, I've come to realize that that kind of unconditional bond is what allows us to be truly supportive of each other. Now, the first time I witnessed the existence of such bond, I was very young. I must have been 3 years old. And of course, I didn't fully grasp it at that time. But I remember it was a Sunday morning. And as usual, we were having breakfast together. Earlier that week, we had received a letter from my grandmother, my mom's mom. And yes, when I was little, there was no such thing as the internet at home, so no emails, no Skype calls, no WhatsApp. We used to send and receive letters, and the whole back and forth would take about a month. So we were quite happy to have gotten news from overseas. And again, our little family tradition was that of waiting till Sunday morning to read the letters all together. So as usual, my mom started reading, but this time, halfway through it, she stopped and started crying. I remember it quite vividly, and I definitely remember being confused about it. I asked her, why are you crying? And she replied, she said in Spanish, extraño a mi mamá, I miss my mom. It was the first time I had ever seen my mom cry, and I just couldn't understand it. I guess as probably every three-year-old would think, I assume that adults never cry, but if they do, it's certainly not because they miss their moms. I did feel sorry for her, but I wasn't sure why. Fast forward about 20 years, I had recently graduated from college and I was ready to make my biggest dream come true. I was preparing to leave Italy and move to Australia to pursue my postgraduate studies at the University of Queensland. I had been dreaming of it and planning it for at least the past 10 years. Now, I don't remember exactly when I caught the, let's call it Australia fever, but I know it happened at some point between reading The Thornbirds and finding out that Russell Crowe was Australian after watching The Gladiator for the 100th time. Anyways, it was finally happening. And of course I was scared, but the excitement was so much that it overshadowed the fear and the concerns. Of course I was going to miss my family, but I thought it was simply going to take some adjusting to not being able to see them all the time. The first 6 to 8 months of my new life just flew by without me even realizing it. There was so much to take care of and learn that I hadn't had time to process everything, to let the new reality sink in. But then I remember one evening, I was in my room just relaxing, listening to some music, and a particular song in my playlist came up. It was a song by an Italian singer that my sister loved and used to play all the time. And suddenly, out of nowhere, I was crying. And it wasn't just a few tears running down my cheeks. I was crying for real. I was sobbing and gasping almost convulsively. But I wasn't crying out of sadness. I started crying because I felt overwhelmed with anger. I was mad at myself for giving up all the small shared rituals and family traditions that a Skype call once a week just couldn't make up for. At the same time, however, quite surprisingly, I also felt extremely grateful. I was grateful for the chance of pursuing my dream, knowing that I had the full and unconditional support of my family. I was grateful because I knew that no matter where my journey was going to take me, I had a place that I could always call home. And at that moment, it hit me. I remember my mom crying while reading her mom's letter, and I finally understood. She had given up her family, her friends, her career, because she believed in the possibility of a better future. She wanted a better future for me and my sister, one where we would have the opportunity to follow our dreams and aspirations. And in spite of the difficulties and the occasional nostalgia, she knew that she had the love and support of her mom, her family. She just felt it. And now I know that it is that same love and support, that bond that when I feel a little lost, gives me the strength to just keep dreaming.
For whatever reason, I can usually tell when something important is going to happen to me, when the way that I think is going to change. I don't know if it's some collection of subconscious ideas I'm only half aware of, but I have this intuition. Everything on those days seems so significant, even when it's not. That was Monday. My homeschool tutor, Miss Evelyn, asked if our class wanted to go to her house to do some work on Monday. I knew something would happen. It wasn't anything I could have expected. I rode there with my friend Sinai. It's strange that we're such close friends. She's rather argumentative while I tend to keep quiet. When we were younger, before I left homeschooling for 2 years, we hardly agreed on anything. But those 2 years at school changed me. I didn't used to have an issue with speaking my mind, but after leaving, I became quieter. I was terrified to share my opinions, because I was one of the only people who believed in things like truth. I would sit, listening, compelled to speak by a strong burning in my chest, but I hardly said anything. When I had to talk, my words were jumbled and confused. We went on a walk that day. Everything was bright. It hurt my eyes, and I had this steady feeling of pointless anxiety. I was waiting for something, trying to enjoy the moment, but overwhelmed by the significance of light shining through trees and the colors. We came to a bridge. Now, one of my classmates, Elijah, decided it was a good idea to climb onto the side of the bridge. He does risky stuff like that and is even more argumentative than Sinai. In fact, that's the first thing I remember him saying. I like to argue. I thought that was an odd thing to be proud of, because he certainly looked pleased with himself. Isn't that a bad thing? I thought. So back on the bridge, I said to him, as much as you annoy me, I would be pretty upset if you fell. I tried not to think much about saying that, but I distinctly remember making the choice to say it. That afternoon, we started a fire in the backyard. Sinai sat on one side of me, Elijah on the other. I asked him how his day had gone and other inconsequential things. It was strange how I could easily have a conversation with him. I can hardly carry a conversation with someone that doesn't want to be contrary every 5 seconds. But here I was talking to someone who did just that. To my surprise, he didn't argue with me. We just talked, because I realized being argumentative isn't all that he is. And in the spirit of foreshadowed coincidence, he said something about wanting to learn Old English. Immediately, I thought of the Old English grammar on my bookshelf at home. I wanted him to have it, but I didn't want to have to give it to him. Yet, I made another choice in the back of my mind that I was yet unaware of. Not long after, Sinai wanted to prepare me for our debate. I think it was mostly a disguise for her to debate the issues that were close to her heart. So we started, all in good fun. But then the conversation shifted to the heavy topic of racism, something Sinai loved to discuss. It was leaving, I realized, that had allowed Sinai and I to become close friends. Because upon leaving, I had been introduced to a multitude of topics that I'd never encountered before. She needed someone who could talk about the difficult things. My tendency to agree with people when I don't, to shy away from the topic and be afraid to talk, was forgotten. The more I argued, the more I found myself capable of disagreeing, as well as reconsidering some points. Perhaps I had reached some new intellectual height. But I realized something again. It didn't have to do with the way that I thought or the way that I expressed my thoughts, because neither of those things was enough for me. No matter how clear I was or how civil the discourse, I was still overwhelmed by the weight of all that we were talking about. So I cried. I got up, ashamed and confused. I went back into the house, caught my breath, and came back out. I'm not crying because of anything you all said, I told them. I'm crying because I don't know what to do. Ever. It was Miss Evelyn who highlighted what I was missing. She said that even if all three of us could disagree on something, we all knew we were saying these things out of love. That was more true than I realized, because even if I disagree with my friends, I still loved them. I hadn't had that in those 2 years. It wasn't as if I hadn't loved my classmates. I had a general feeling of respect and goodwill towards them, but I could never have connected with them on a deep emotional level. Even if I had had difficult conversations with my peers, they were always overshadowed by a desire to care about people without establishing the truth. We drove to where our parents were going to pick us up. There was a swing set there, so the three of us sat in the swings talking. As the night continued, I began to feel even more peculiar, more myself than I'd ever been, though still anxious. I think nighttime, under the right circumstances, can make me feel that way. It's not as if the tiredness was making me delusional, causing me to think I could trust people more than I should. It had to do with the stars and being cold, and Elijah offered me his jacket. It had to do with smiling and looking to Sinai, looking up at the stars, kicking my shoes off, and listening to my friends. I felt that deep need to say something. I felt so deeply this feeling I'd only ever caught in glimpses, this distinct peace of mind. It was as if all the details I'd been collecting that day were pointing me towards this one moment, and this one moment pointing me towards something even greater. For a brief moment, the constant haze that separates me from the world and all true feeling vanished. I knew what I had to say. I was afraid, yet I said it. I actually said it. You know what, guys? I really love y'all. It's hard for me to say that to friends, even to family. It's hard for me to say that because my next instinct is to burst into tears. Not because I don't mean it, but because I care so much, and I'm so afraid that others won't care as much as I do. It was that had allowed me to talk to them. Not some intellectuality, but love. And Monday wasn't exactly over, or at least its effects. That Wednesday, I went to the library with Sinai. I wasn't expecting it, but I shared a piece of Monday with her that had been unhinged from my subconscious, rising to the forefront of my mind. As the elevator doors closed, I trusted her. And that Friday, my dad came home with a new book of Old English grammar, completely unprompted. I wanted to give Elijah the book we already had, but I'd been too afraid. I didn't want to do that. I didn't want to show how much I cared, because most of the times I've done that in the past, it's never turned out the way I wanted it to. But here was a book I hadn't even asked for, an actual answer to a prayer I had been so terrified to pray. I wasn't going to be a coward again. So that Christmas, despite how awkward I felt, I gave him the book and thanked him for being my friend. It's hard to tell people how much they mean to you. It's hard to sit there and wonder, what are they going to think of this? Are they going to think I'm strange or stupid or silly? Are they going to do this, that, or whatever? Do they even care? It's the truth, though. I really love y'all. No matter how many inconsequential arguments the three of us get into, no matter how many offensive things we say and do, I really still love you. A lot. But that's not why. I don't love you for the arguments that we have. I love you both for everything that you are. And I mean that with the most sincerity I have ever meant it, which is saying something. Because I don't love with reservation. even if I love with fear. But I'm trying not to love with fear anymore. I really love y'all.
I'm from Los Angeles, and perhaps due to the stereotype, I grew up obsessed with movies. My imagination ran wild with Indiana Jones and Charlie Chaplin, orcs and lightsabers. Movies always played a central role in my life. Unsurprisingly, this sometimes led to thoughts about making movies, telling my own stories. But back then, it all seemed like such an abstract possibility that I never really took steps towards actually pursuing filmmaking. The one step, beyond watching any movie that I could get my hands on, that could really be called a step towards making movies, was going to film school. But to say what I did was go to film school is disingenuous. I went, I got there, I hated the culture, so after one semester, I changed majors. A couple years later, I decided I had gotten it right the first time and went back to film school. And then after another single semester, I left again and graduated with an unrelated major. Through this back and forth, in the back of my mind, I had resigned myself to thinking that the ship had sailed on any distant directorial dream I had ever entertained. But here we come to the lesson I learned that will become clear as the story progresses. No dream is too crazy or too out of reach if you're willing to fully commit to chasing it and to fighting through anything that gets in your way. 1 year after graduating, something clicked. I was going to make a movie. Despite wasting my opportunity in film school, despite having next to no experience, I was going to make a movie, damn it. And I did. I spent all the money I had and shot a 20-minute Western out in the California desert. It then took me almost 2 years to craft a movie out of what we shot that summer, as I taught myself how to edit film, edit sound, correct color, and, as the change of pace, driving all the way back out to the desert a couple more times to get extra footage when necessary. But I finished. I actually had a movie, a short film under my belt. So, what was next? A feature film. Why not, right? I had made a 20-minute short happen almost out of thin air. A feature only had to be 90. How much harder could those extra 70 minutes really be? I figured that if everything broke just right, it would be a piece of cake. But things didn't break quite right. Over the next 6 months, I became unemployed. My girlfriend of 2 years left town. My family, who had moved to Washington a couple years before, found itself in turmoil, and as a cherry on top, a couple of my closest friends got jobs elsewhere and also moved away. Entering 2019, I was suddenly broke, lonely, and depressed. The easiest thing in the world would have been to forget my crazy dreams of a feature film. I had a short. I could be proud of that. If I really wanted to, I could even make another one. Why do the crazy thing and go for a feature-length film? Because that was the dream. So I did what I could. I built myself back up, bit by bit, and wrote and wrote and wrote, and soon it was July, and I had a script. And I had, if you squinted, what looked like a budget. I had a plan. I was going to shoot my movie, and then afterwards, moved to Washington in August to be with my family while I worked on post-production. So we started shooting. And shooting was hard. My miniature budget meant a miniature crew, which meant I had to do almost everything myself. Not only directing, but also camera, lighting, sound, equipment, sets, props, costumes, food, transportation. At the end of every day, I'd be drenched in sweat, and I'd sleep like a baby. But against all odds, it was coming out good. I mean, I'm probably biased, but I looked at the footage, and at the end of the day, and it looked like one of the movies I grew up with. The movie was going to be called A Pandemonic Serenade. It was a horror thriller about an exorcist in training going rogue and pursuing a demon on her own. Bree, the lead for my Western, had returned to play the lead in this one. The rest of the cast, assembled mostly through a Facebook ad, had turned out to be exceptional. The first location we shot was the exorcist's office. So naturally, I created an entire exorcist's office in my apartment. I stacked all my day-to-day stuff in my little bedroom, my bed squeezed in between boxes and furniture. I covered all the books in my bookcase in fake leather. I got skulls and artifacts from thrift stores and the sort of people who sell skulls online. And it looked great. and my cast looked even better acting in front of it for 5 shooting days. So we wrapped that location, and I immediately started taking everything down and moving everything to set up the next one. With the freewheeling nature of the production, we hadn't scheduled anything too far in advance. So I still don't know what exactly compelled me to do this, but on July 9th, I called my leasing office to determine exactly what day in August I had to be out, so I could plan out the rest of the shooting days and set them in stone. I thought it was the 15th because that was the day I had moved in, but I wanted to be sure. They matter-of-factly informed me that my lease wasn't up on the 15th. It wasn't up in August. It was up in exactly 10 days on July 19th. They had quietly changed my lease from 12 to 11 months, about 11 months before. Disaster. I sat there on my couch, which was pushed against the wall to make room for the set, and stared off at the partially taken down exorcist's office in my living room. This was it. Despite everything I had gotten through to get to this point, there was no way I could complete the 9 remaining shooting days and move out by the 19th. It was done. The dream was dead. I would have cried, but I was in too much shock. My mind raced through what this meant. This would probably be a fun story sometime down the line. Hey, remember the time I made half a movie? What would my cast say when I told them? Would I be able to use this footage for something else? I was grasping at straws. It would have been so easy to give up then. Just throw in the towel and get on with the giant job of moving everything out of the apartment. Of course, you'll also recall that I was planning to move out of Washington right after I was done in August, so I had nowhere to put all my stuff once I was out. Something kept the gears turning, and by the end of the day, I had figured out something that might work. I was going to shoot 2 more days in a slap-together set, shooting tighter than normal so that the set wouldn't be as visible, then move everything out into a storage unit, and then beg whatever friends I still had in LA to let me stay on their couch while I found somewhere to shoot the rest of the movie. And that's what we did. We shot those 2 days with the added pressure of the hard deadline of moving out hanging right over our heads, and when the cast left at the end of the second day, I shut the door and immediately started packing everything up. I got out just in time and put everything except some clothes and all my filming equipment into a storage unit. And then, while I found where to shoot next, I stayed on a friend's couch, then another, until I finally found a place I could rent for a week, and we shot the rest of the movie in there. Energy for that week was insane. The apartment was unbearably hot. The pressure from that only ramped up the pressure from the time constraint at the new place. I often had to fix the lighting and the props for the next shot while going over the next scene with my actors to save time. We kept up an incredible pace, and I really couldn't have done it without my cast and their incredible patience. They fought through heat and next to no rehearsal time to stay late and get every shot we needed. I spent that week in there one major mishap away from a nervous breakdown. The stress was unbelievable. But at the same time, at that point, what else could happen that we couldn't overcome? I overcame my wasted opportunity in film school. I overcame the personal hurricane that had been my past several months. I had even overcome the sudden loss of my apartment and thus my set in the middle of production. The momentum of this thing was now too great. This was happening, no matter what. And it did. We faced down every curveball life could think to throw at us, and we shot the damn thing. In my opinion, the intense pressure that resulted from the insanity of the second half of the production led to some creative choices I would never have made otherwise. Case in point, I somehow found the time in the middle of all that to rewrite the entire ending. Again, I have to thank my cast for their infinite patience in bearing with me for the added stress that brought. They were incredible, and I could not have done it without them. I'll cherish the memories we made that summer for the rest of my life. I'm currently in the middle of post-production now, and watching the footage never fails to put a smile on my face. We did that. We made this. I sometimes wish I could go back and talk to the Daniel fresh out of college who had resigned himself to never pursuing this dream. I could show him what we made. I could tell him what it took to get there, what we had to overcome. He might ask me, despite all the stress, all the uncertainty, everything, would you do it again? Would I? Absolutely, in a heartbeat. In fact, I'm almost done writing my next script, a sci-fi thriller about a techno cult. But if I really think about it, would be no need to go and tell Daniel from 5 years ago what waited for him if he just kept fighting. Without knowing the happy ending, he kept fighting anyway. I kept fighting. Despite every setback, small to very big, despite knowing that the goal itself is crazy, I fought through. And with the help of some amazing people, I made it happen. And I must say, I can't wait till the next one.
My story is about growing and how wrestling with our problems can be a stimulation to our growth. That Sunday evening, I felt like a teenager coming home from school as I sat at that dinner table at my college friend's new home. But I wasn't a teenager. I was 28, deciding whether I should stay at a homeless shelter another night or ask to stay at their house. My answer may seem obvious to you, but it wasn't to me. I woke up that morning 2 years ago and I decided to put on the cleanest, chicest athletic shirt I had. I remember waking up early because all of my bunkmates would rush to the single mirror in the bathroom when the first wake-up call was announced. I applied blush on my cheeks, combed my hair, applied mascara on my eyelashes, applied my teddy bear lipstick, and blow-dried my hair. I looked exceedingly beautiful. I knew that after working at the gym for the next 8 hours, my makeup would completely fade away and I would look more natural and sane before dinner. My college friend and his wife alternated hosting Sunday dinners with our other friends from college every week. My friend texted me just as my shift ended and asked me if I needed a ride from work to dinner. I told him I was already on my way, but I wasn't. I was waiting for the next bus across the street from the gym I worked at, soaking wet in the rain. When I arrived at the dinner, my friends embraced me with smiles, hugs, and how are yous. They all contributed home-cooked meals to the Sunday dinner. I didn't bring anything. I didn't want to buy something cheap from the value section of the grocery store. I was angry at myself that they already one-upped me. But I needed to think of what I was going to say when they would ask me why I was living at a homeless shelter. So I pulled my best Dale Carnegie tactics and became genuinely interested in their success as managers and leaders in their companies. My friends were humble and detailed about their lives, which to me seemed easy. I figured they knew something that I didn't. All the books I read and all the ambition I had didn't match their ability to make the right choices, an ability I did not possess or I was questioning because my plans didn't unfold themselves as I would have hoped. I could not accept that I was not successful like them, so I would pretend I had no pain. I could not accept that I was falling short of what I would like to be able to do, which was to thrive on my own. I was living in Virginia at this point. I had decided to move back in with my parents after my job as an aerospace engineer was terminated and I foreclosed on my home. 2 months before the Sunday dinner, frustrated with having my mom tell me what to do or show any power over me, I threatened her with hot water and a knife, called the police, and told them that I didn't feel safe with my parents anymore, and they took me away. The truth is, I didn't trust anyone, and I didn't feel safe anywhere. So I didn't stop my anger. I wanted it. The cop drove me to the community center. At the center home, I had my own room, daily group therapy sessions, warm meals every day, and one-on-ones with different therapists. I chose to be detailed about what was going on and what happened with them so they would understand and enlighten me with their superior knowledge of the mind. I learned voicing my pain to an open ear made my pain seem more manageable. However, Their reasonable explanations of my behavior didn't seem to help me. I gave, but I did not receive. So I could not let go. They always focused on something irrelevant to me, so my therapy sessions with them became self-serving. The rotation of therapists during the day and every day seemed like a chess game. Sometimes they would offer me solutions to easy issues, and other times they would let me talk until my face turned blue. They were searching for my trigger, but no amount of wordplay could break me at that point. Once, my therapist was running late for a therapy session, so I waited outside their office until they were ready. Suddenly, I felt a cold liquid run down my neck, all the way down to my pants. I swung around and pushed my attacker back. My attacker was a large woman and knocked me to the ground in one push and was ready to swing at me. I started kicking her as soon as I touched the ground. A therapist intervened before anything else could happen. I ended up in the office basement with another therapist, explaining the chain of events. I didn't know this person, but I had no choice but to trust her, which was very difficult for me. After an hour of me talking and her nodding, they sent me to bed. I was attacked, and all they did was offer me an extended talk show. So I decided to call the cops from their phone. It wasn't a surprise when they told me I was not allowed to stay at the center home anymore the next morning. They told me that there was a bed available at the homeless shelter. They called a taxi for me and sent me there. At the shelter, I was assigned a top bunk in a room with 10 bunk beds. Every Thursday night, they would hold a meeting, say a pledge, go over upcoming events, and then we would be assigned our chores. I spent the meetings judging my bunkmates for their lack of hygiene and some for their lack of purpose. I had a purpose because I was becoming independent of my family and I could survive on my own. I was oblivious to the fact I was living for free off of government taxpayer money. One night, my bunkmate, 2 bunks down, started calling me a nasty bitch when I decided to change my shirt at my bunk one morning. The bathroom stalls were completely full and there was no privacy. It was funny too, because the larger and louder ladies would walk around completely naked and the offended lady wouldn't utter a peep. I had a feeling her aggression towards me would escalate, so I knew it was time for a change of plans. The idea that the community center, shelter, therapists, and police were going to fix my problems completely faded away at this point. My assigned counselor at the shelter met with me once every 2 weeks for 30 minutes. After I got a job, half of my days were spent sitting on a bus going to and from my job as a front desk receptionist at a gym. My tasks involved folding apparel and wiping down gym equipment for $11 an hour. I wasn't working towards anything. My framework for decision making was based on my response to my perception of other people's power. So I asked myself, what do I want? I could not answer anything that I wanted in my life at that point, but I did know that I didn't want to be in the circumstances I was in then. Back at the Sunday dinner, I told my friends I had a fight with my family and decided to live in a homeless shelter. I decided to ask if I could stay with them at their home until I could get an engineering job. After that weekend, I moved in with my friend to my friend's home. And since then, I have regained my relationship with my mother, moved back to my parents' home, restarted my engineering career, defined my objectives, and now I'm telling you my story. I refuse to tell you that my experiences led to the success I have now. No one learns from trauma, and trauma is not a teacher. Having a vision alone, hoping and wishing and thinking positively never satisfied me. I had to decide what I wanted to do and start doing it to see it through. I'm giving you my story so you know the importance of growth and that it is not pain-free. Your behavior does not dictate who you are. Who you are dictates your behavior. Your decisions will pave your way. So decide who you are with every decision you make.
Your destiny can be changed by a split moment decision. That was revealed to me when I spoke to my mom about her decision to leave her birthplace, the enchanted island of Puerto Rico, to come to New York. She said, "Let me take you to that day." So it was a Saturday, March 13th to be exact. My mom was a nurse at the Fajardo District Hospital, about 2 hours away from where her mother lived in San Juan. My mom would often go there on weekends to visit. On this particular day, there was a yellow padded envelope waiting for her. When she opened the envelope, there was a purple envelope inside and what looked to be the prettiest invitation. When she looked closer, it was a wedding invitation. But what she saw next puzzled her. Her name was listed as the bride, and George was listed as the groom. So George was this moreno from New York who had studied at the University of Puerto Rico with my mom's younger sister, Lali. The most that George and Milta had said to each other were adios and hola, but nothing more. She wasn't engaged to him. She wasn't even his girlfriend. Could this be some kind of mistake? Was he inviting me to my own wedding, she thought? After all, the last time that Milta saw George was 8 months ago. It was when she had visited New York to visit her cousin Delia. They went to the World's Fair, and there she bumped into George. Hola, George. He was there with his family members, and she just remembers that they were all talking so fast. And they started to laugh. And my mom didn't know if she had said something funny or if they were laughing at her accent. Nonetheless, she just thought they were so different. After all, George was the youngest of his 12 siblings. My mom was the second oldest of 12 siblings. George was African American, Milta was Puerto Rican, his native language was English, her native language was Spanish. He ate pork, she didn't. You know what I'm saying. So she looked at this invitation and she said, this must be someone else. After all, my mom never wanted to get married. She was 29 years old and in those times considered an old maid. But that didn't bother her in the least. She made her own money and could go and come as she pleased. She wanted to travel the world and do it on her own terms. Plus, she saw how her mother was treated by my grandfather and step-grandfather. From what I understand, my grandfather was a player. This man would have one woman after the next woman, and he made telenovelas look easy. And my step-grandfather, he was a retired Korean soldier, and he knew how to be a person who did nothing all day. If you ever wanted to see somebody waste an entire day, he was your guy. I think he invented the word chillaxing. So the evening that my mom received this invitation, her stepfather came into her bedroom. She thought he was coming to talk to her about her decision, but instead, she spent the entire night trying to peel his hands away from her body. This good-for-nothing man was trying to have his way with my mother. The next morning, she woke up and told her mom about it, and my grandmother didn't seem to believe her. It was in this moment that my mom made a split-moment decision and decided she wanted nothing to do with her household. She wanted something more. She dialed George. Jess, I will marry you. 4 days before her wedding, she arrived in New York. This felt like the strangest moment. Here she was on her wedding day that George completely planned, and she felt so strange. Her thoughts were talking so loud, she kept looking around, hoping that no one really heard them. She had borrowed her younger sister Laline's wedding dress, jewelry, and shoes. In this moment, she was facing her truth and the lie of her arranged marriage. There she was, getting married in a Baptist church, yet she was very Catholic. All of her bridesmaids were George's siblings. And her only guest that day was her cousin Delia from the Bronx. The pastor said, "Say I do," and she did. And I want to tell you, this was the best decision of her life. My mom, Milta, and dad, George, were married for 53 years. Together, they raised 3 college-educated children. I'm the youngest of the 3, and they traveled the world. They remained together until death did its part and took my dad 2 years ago. My parents' marriage taught me that an invitation and a split moment decision could change the course of your life. Sometimes saying yes means saying goodbye to everything you know and having the courage to embrace the unknown.
I'm going to let you in on a little secret. I'm part of the Bayhive. Now, you might be wondering, what is a Bayhive and what does this have to do with my story? So I won't keep you in suspense for long. The Bayhive is for the fans of the one and only Beyonce, the singer. Now, for those who love her, we call her Queen Bey. And the reason why I really have felt very drawn to Beyonce over the years is because she empowers and inspires us, especially women, and especially myself as a Black woman. I remember listening to Beyonce, singing to her in the shower, enjoying her music, or crying in the car, and just really throughout my childhood, especially my adolescence and my young adult years, feeling like her music made me feel valid. And I believe a part of that validation truly came from not having it growing up. Growing up, I dealt with a unique way of parenting. My first set of parents gave me up for adoption because of mental illness, and they weren't able to take care of me. So at 3 months old, I went into the foster care system. Fortunately, I was placed with a really good family, and they were a Caucasian family. They were very loving. It was a little dog and 2 parents. And my mom and dad at that time were very special. I still remember them singing to me at bedtime and giving me Oreos and warm milk. But that also ended in a way that I didn't expect. The mother, she died of a diabetic coma. And that left me alone with my foster father. He tried his best, but eventually he came to the conclusion that he couldn't raise me all by himself. So then I ended up going on a show called Wednesday's Child that promotes foster children who are up for adoption. I was very blessed again. And I found, or a family found me, in fact. And this was an African-American family. And they took me in, and I became very close to my siblings. They had their own children, and my adoptive mother and my adoptive father. More so my father. I was a real daddy's girl. And so it came to pass that my adoptive father, he passed shortly after I turned 18. So in hindsight, I realized that going through those transitions, it was a question of who did I identify with and who am I? And even though I was blessed on that journey, it left a real void for me feeling validated, especially from men and seeking that attention. So right after my father passed, I ended up getting into this relationship, and it was quite toxic after the honeymoon phase. So that's what I want to focus on. And I chose a song of Beyonce's because she is an artist that I can really relate to, that helped me get through such hard times. She's going to help me get through my story today. I'm using her song When I Was a Boy. So in this song, she talks about how she was mistreated by a man and how she would get revenge. That was her takeaway. If she were a boy, she would get him back, and she would do all the things that, you know, he did to her. And it's a cool song. I like it. But what I decided to do was take the premise of it, of being mistreated, and talk about how when I was a girl, I looked for validation from men. But, you know, unlike her story where it ends and she's crying in tears because she's a girl and she can't ever be that way with him in real life. I've decided, although I cry long and hard, I persevered and I got up. And I understand that validation comes from within, not a man, not a woman, but from yourself. So please enjoy my musical parody of her song, When I Was a Boy. And this is my version of my self-created song, When I Was a Girl. So this is my story as a young girl. This is my story as a woman. You, me, us.
When I was a girl, I had childish ways. Roll out of bed in the morning, thinking about boys all day. Drink shots with the guys, and chase it with beer. Hey, bartender, over here. Looking for validation. Behind makeup, I had a real fear. Would they see the real me? When I was a girl, I didn't quite understand my full worth or my value. I swear now I'm a better woman. I listen to me, 'cause in me I see the young girl that I once was, who was taken for granted for being young and naive. When I was a girl, I would blow up his phone, would spend all night crying, waiting for him to come home. I put him first, 'cause my standards were low. Faithful and loyal, 'cause I was scared of being alone.
Hello? What do you mean you're not coming home? I'm done.
I swear now I'm a better woman. I listen to me, 'cause in me I see the young girl that I once was taken for granted for being young and naive. I don't have to be a boy to prove that I am the bigger person. I appreciate that. If you thought I would play games with you, you thought wrong. When I was a girl, I didn't quite understand my full worth or my value, looking for it in a man. Now I listen to me, 'cause in me I see that I'm a grown woman and I put too much work in. I have to trust and believe in me.
Though I was a bookworm as a kid and discovered much of the world through reading, it was my father, a lowly waiter with an 8th grade education, who gave me my true compass to life. I was a voracious reader and grew up priding myself on becoming educated. I read everything I could get my hands on, and I saw the world through authors like Dostoevsky and Gabriel Garcia Marquez and Harper Lee and Langston Hughes. And it was through them I was able to transcend the confines of the segregated world in which I found myself in Hampton, Virginia. My daddy, on the other hand, was not well educated, and I wished he had been. He left school in the 8th grade at age 14 to work as a sharecropper. Born in 1905, he had 9 brothers and sisters, 7 stepbrothers and sisters, and 4 half brothers and sisters. Eventually, he made his way to the city, to Newport News, where he worked in the hospitality industry. He was a waiter at fine resorts and dining establishments around the state. He served wealthy white people at places where he could never stay and never dine. Even though we did not have much money, my daddy always managed to have a big car, always a Chrysler New Yorker. And one of his greatest joys was to take our family on vacation. Daddy was so proud. Now you have to understand that Black families in my neighborhood in the 1960s did not go on vacation. My younger sister and brother, we get excited and we would pack the car with suitcases, pillows, blankets, my brother's baby crib, thermos jugs, coolers, and ice chest, while my mother, a registered nurse, would pack the home cooked fried chicken and potato salad and coleslaw and sweet iced tea. With the car packed, we would head out to see the world. I would sit on the front seat between my mother and my father, and I would read the maps and direct Daddy on the route. This was a big responsibility because I had to keep us from getting lost. There was no GPS, just me, the map, and the destination. Since my father had an amazing network of family and friends, we went many places. We would leave Hampton, Virginia, and drive to DC, and we'd spend time with my mother's sister, Fanny, my Aunt Fanny, and her husband, Uncle Clarence. And then we drive around DC to see the monuments, and I recognized the Lincoln Memorial, the Washington Monument, the places I had read about. Wow. And then to one of the best places of all, Chicago, Illinois, where my mother's sister Celestine and my father's 2 brothers, Arthur and Cyrus, lived. I saw Lake Michigan, and we went downtown to Marshall Fields. I learned about the Loop and the L train. One time when I was about 14, Daddy told me he had a surprise. He wanted me to be the navigator of our route from Detroit to Canada, another country. I figured it all out. The distances in kilometers, the road signs, the gas in liters. we were in Toronto. What a beautiful, clean city. And then on to Niagara Falls, one of the 7 wonders of the world. I had never seen anything like it. But the real surprise, we stayed in a hotel. All of these trips, all of these years, we'd never been to a hotel. In fact, as I recall later, my father would often pull over into a rest stop and sleep for several hours when he was tired. I did not know then what I know now, which is that for the most part, Black people did not stay in hotels. They were off limits, but not in Canada. We walked into the lobby and someone took our bags and they unpacked all of that stuff that was in the trunk. They waited on us. They served us. I had always seen Black people as waiters, and now I was being served. This is what it feels like to be served. There were chandeliers and velvet curtains, and we ordered room service, just like in the movies. I felt like a princess. When I grew up, I continued to learn from books and became a citizen of the world. But I owe so much of my education about what is important in life to the time I spent with a man who had an 8th grade education. I learned what it means to be part of a family, both immediate and extended, the importance of being both a gracious host and guest, that there is always room and time for family and friends, and the thrill of exploration of going where you've never been before. But the most valuable lesson I learned from my daddy was that I could overcome the challenges of being Black in a racist society, and I deserved equal treatment. I learned what it feels like to be a princess and to be rich when you don't have a dime, and to know the joy of love and laughter. These are the things you cannot learn in a book. They are the things I learned on our family vacations.
I've used to never believe that our ancestors would talk to us. I didn't think that they could hear us or communicate. Until I started working on the stories about my Italian ancestors. Then I discovered things, peculiar things. It was the day I was writing a chapter about my grandmother. Now, my grandmother herself was an engaging storyteller. She mingled real life with anecdotes and stories. She always conveyed a lesson. It was like a little fable. That afternoon, I took a pen in hand and I started writing the story, and something else came out, another story. It seemed like what I wanted to what I wanted to write was different than wanted to be written. And it was a fully formed story about my grandparents' marriage, the day they married, and full with sensory perception, even thoughts, everything. Dialogue, I wrote it down. But when I finished, I needed confirmation. So I called my sister and I said, look what happened to me. And she was saying, no. That's not true. You must write the truth. So trash that. Don't do anything with that. And write something that is true. So I was thinking, but I felt my grandmother next to me. I feel like she was dictating this to me. And she's like, no, she wouldn't have it. And so I hung up the phone and I turn to the portrait of my grandmother and say, Grandma, please help me here. If this story is true, I want you to give me a sign. And just, not just a sign, like not just any sign, like a big sign, something really, really you. And so I felt this strange energy, and I put on my jacket. I went out for a walk. I walk past the neighborhood. And then I found myself in front of a forest. Now, I didn't know that there was a forest around my home. But it was compelling. I went in. It was like my legs moved. And then I walked even more deep. I was deep inside the forest when I glanced at my phone and I realized 5% charge. And nobody knew where I was. And it was getting dark. And I turned back, and as I was going up a hill, I saw this beautiful emerald glowing light in the forest. And it was like a bubble of green, like an orb, and so enchanting that I had to take my phone out and make a picture. And I took a picture, and then I saw more orbs floating, and 3% charge. And this was getting spooky, and nobody knew where I was. So then I kept walking, trying to find my way out. And then I felt somebody was looking at me. I felt like somebody was maybe kind of like felt in the back of my head. I felt this like the goosebumps, the stare. And I turned to see, and I saw this white ghostly face of an animal deep in the forest. Now, I took my phone, 1% charge, and I was fascinated and scared. What is this? And this thing was like alive, looking at me. And as I moved closer, I realized it was a beautiful white deer. It was a fawn looking at me, scared at me. And so I was like, took my phone and snapped the picture. Or I thought, because the phone went blank. So I finally managed to arrive home. It was dark. And my husband was worried about me, and he was like, what happened? And I told the story, and you have to understand, he's a little bit skeptical, but a whole lot of nerdy. So he knows all these facts. He says, white deers are very rare in Virginia. They only appear in Wisconsin. And I said, what about the green light? And he's like, it's only a reflection of the camera. So I was, embarrassed, because by the time my phone had charged up, I was believing him and disbelieving myself. And I was so embarrassed about making this fuss about this magical thing that was happening to me and my grandmother. But then I turned off the camera and I look at my phone, and there they were. So I had a sign. I had asked for a sign, and I got a sign. Better than that, I had actually inhabited one of my grandmother's tales or fables. And I had a picture to prove it. My grandmother used to say, life is full of magic. But most importantly, the universe loves to delight us. And believe in yourself. And the moment you least expect it, you will be taken to enchanted places. And I remember that. And now she was right. Because today, this is what I have to say. Yes, ancestors talk to us. And yes, it was about time I started to believe in myself.
Why are you glaring at me? I'm not. Why are you giving the interns assignments? My supervisor asked me to find something for them to do, and I wasn't giving them anything substantive. You don't have the capacity to determine what is substantive. Sound familiar? You may not have heard these exact comments, but whether it's mean-spirited comments, demeaning gossip, isolation from colleagues, or even physical intimidation, most of us have experienced workplace bullying at some point in our lives. It can be particularly painful because we spend most of our waking hours at work. According to the Workplace Bullying Institute, workplace bullying can have a severe negative impact on your emotional health, your physical health, and your self-esteem. According to the Institute, 80% of people who have gone through traumatic workplace experiences have suffered from anxiety. 52% have had a panic attack. 49% have had clinical depression, whether new or exacerbated. And 30% have shown symptoms of PTSD. I've experienced workplace bullying firsthand. I would walk in the office door and immediately get this feeling of dread and anxiety. I would then sit in my office doing my work, and as people came by, they would speak to each and every person in the adjacent offices by name, and then intentionally not speak to me. It was done in a manner so that I knew that I was being isolated. I've experienced these type of experiences for years in a few environments, and it's had a major impact on my emotional health. I used to have an easy, shy, relaxed smile, but I became tense and despondent. Due to the trauma, I was walking around like with a blank stare, just totally shell-shocked. I became so anxious that I would regularly stammer my words when I was trying to make a point. I was always on guard and would commonly glance around in a nervous way, trying to determine what people think of me. I'm still trying to get over that. And often I would try to get my words out, but words would come out that just didn't make sense. Workplace bullying also has a major impact on physical health. According to the Workplace Bullying Institute, it causes body pain and tension, cardiovascular problems, skin problems, gastrointestinal problems, and it weakens your immune system. When I was going through workplace bullying incidents, it impacted my health deeply. I would get tense in the neck and shoulders, so it's up. I was practically walking around like this, and I had so much neck and shoulder pain. I would get sick often as the stress and the trauma exacerbated my asthma. So I would have long bouts of both uncontrolled asthma as well as bronchitis, which would linger often for months. In addition, workplace bullying has a major impact on self-esteem. Victims often suffer from imposter syndrome. Psychology today defines imposter syndrome as a phenomenon in which well-accomplished people believe that they are undeserving of their achievements, that they aren't as competent and intelligent as others might think, or that they're a fraud, and that eventually they'll be found out, even though their accomplishments are indeed legitimate and well-earned. I definitely suffered from imposter syndrome and am still working my way through it in some ways. At my worst, I would downplay my accomplishments. I wouldn't tell people that I had a law degree. I wouldn't tell people that I graduated from an elite T14 law school. I wouldn't tell them I was a licensed attorney or that I've been licensed for a decade and a half. Wouldn't tell them my age, that I'm 43, because I was so afraid that that would increase the expectations of me and I wouldn't be able to live up to it. I would be really knowledgeable about a subject, but I would be so nervous and unsure of myself that as a result of my natural shyness from childhood through early adulthood, and then exacerbated by the workplace bullying. Thus, others would assume that I didn't know what I was talking about. And they would roll their eyes at one another and snicker while I was talking, as by this point, I was usually stammering, trying to get my point out. The trauma from workplace bullying has a long-lasting impact, even after you escape that job. Similar to other abusive relationships, it can follow you from job to job until you truly seek healing. For me, the trauma personally affected personal friendships and relationships. I became extremely sensitive to criticism, and I was already sensitive. And it caused me not to trust others for fear of rejection. However, there's good news. I am a living testimony that you can overcome the trauma from workplace bullying. But with lots of hard work, time, therapy, self-care methods such as meditation and yoga, while I'm still a work in progress, I have definitely moved from surviving to thriving. My hope in telling my story is that no one would have to go through this again. If you're experiencing workplace bullying, tell someone. If you witness it, let the victim know that they're not alone. Remember, there's no such thing as remaining neutral when you witness workplace bullying. To be silent is to be complicit. Are you complicit? A few years ago, I wrote a song about my experiences. So I'm performing it now that my confidence has grown. In the D.C, it's as hard as can be. I'm not talking about the streets, but the political scene, where cats are straight ruthless on their quest for the most. Mean-spirited bullies get a kick out of destroying folks.
Last winter, I started taking ice skating lessons at my local rink. Now, I hadn't been ice skating since my grandpa used to take me as a little girl, and it showed. But never mind. Me, when I wobbled out onto the ice, I felt just like a princess. My little princess is what my grandpa used to call me. Mi princesita. It takes me right back to when my mom used to drop me off at my grandma and grandpa's on her way to work. My grandpa and I had a game where we'd sit on the floor and roll out a layer of pink Play-Doh. I'd take a giant cookie cutter in the shape of a penny and I'd stamp down and he would wipe away the excess. Then we'd take my pennies and put them in the bank and he'd help me count how many I had. When I had 10 pennies, we'd go shopping in the kitchen and we'd buy a glass of milk and 2 cookies. And he would help me count out how many pennies I owed and how many pennies I had left. That's how come when I went to Head Start at the age of 3, I already knew how to add and subtract. The irony of this is that when my grandpa landed on the shores of America in 1924, he did not speak any English, nor did he read or write. Often, my grandpa would sit me on his lap and tell me stories about his childhood in Ecuador. I was enchanted by how he had escaped from the mean nuns at the orphanage in the mountains, how his father was a tall colonel in the Spanish army with squinting blue eyes and a blonde mustache. His mother was an Incan princess with long black hair braided down her back. When she died in childbirth, the colonel was so sad that he left his newborn son in the care of the nuns. Now, Grandpa escaped from those nuns, and he was just 14. He went in search of the fabled city by the sea over the mountains. He walked for many days and many nights through a dark, scary forest. One day, a big black mountain lion trapped him high up in the tree. And for 3 whole days, my grandpa couldn't eat or sleep or drink because the lion was waiting down below to eat him up. Well, finally, my grandpa shook his strong fists and beat them against his chest, and he let out a mighty roar. And the mountain lion got so scared that he ran away. When my grandfather reached the edge of the forest, he looked down the mountain, and there it was, Guayaquil, the fabled city by the sea. Grandpa had never seen the ocean before, and there were boats, bigger than he ever imagined possible. Grandpa went to explore on one of these boats, and that's how he ended up as a stowaway. When, about 3 months later, he walked off the gangway onto the shores of Manhattan, it was wintertime, and my grandpa was wearing the only thing he owned, a pea coat that had been given to him by a crew member. They had taken up a collection and put $11 in his pocket. It was a fortune. I've often wondered if my grandpa stood in bread lines that winter, if he sheltered in church basements. He never said, but I do know that he eventually got a job at a shipyard in Manhattan where he helped build ships. He married my grandma, who was an immigrant from Spain, and they moved to a tiny little tenement in the Bronx, where they eventually had 2 children, my mother and my uncle. That was the apartment where one day my grandpa would take care of me. My grandpa never quite loved the winters in New York. He resisted. His blood seemed to resist the need to thicken. But he also hated to be cramped inside, so he would often take me ice skating. Ice skating, the joy of ice skating, helped me forget the pain of my mother's violence at home. And when I was 7 years old, my grandpa bought me a pair of white ice skates. They had shoelaces with pink pom-poms that made me feel just like a princess. I had a pink knit hat and a matching pink scarf and matching pink mittens, and my grandpa would hold me tight before letting me go on the ice. Ten cuidado, mi princesita, he would call as I glided out of reach. My grandpa was the joy of my life, and I wish things could have stayed that way. But when my mother died in March of 1986, my grandfather and I were estranged and hadn't spoken for many years. I have a vivid memory of him bending over my mother's coffin at her funeral and keening. Mi alma, he sobbed, my daughter, my soul. Though he was overcome by grief, I did not go to comfort him. The rift happened one day when my mother and I had a knockdown, drag-out fight. Over what? I don't remember. I was 16. and way past the age when she could beat me with impunity. We were in the kitchen, screaming at the top of our lungs, when suddenly she slapped me across the face. It stung, and my eyes immediately filled with tears. But instead of swallowing them down as usual, I let out a primal scream, and I slapped her right back. Hard. It had been a long time coming. My grandfather ran into the kitchen, and at first he just looked completely shocked. And then his expression turned to anger, and he glared at me. And then that anger turned to disgust. And then he turned away. I was devastated. I felt so betrayed, so deeply hurt. What I realized in that moment was that I was, in fact, princess number 2. That though he loved me deeply, my grandfather's loyalties were with his daughter, my mother. He simply couldn't accept that I had hit her, though she had been hitting me my whole life. In his mind, that show of disrespect simply wasn't allowed. My grandpa died the year after my mother. He died of a cerebral embolism, but everybody said he died of a broken heart. By that point, our relationship had long been irreparable, and I was so bitter, I did not go to his funeral. So, last winter, when I decided that I'm going to go learn how to ice skate again. I wobble onto the ice, looking like the Michelin Man, wearing 3 bulky layers and a pink crash helmet. I'm also wearing knee pads and elbow pads and wrist guards and even a tailbone protector that looks like an oversized diaper. But no matter. When I glide out onto that ice, or wobble is a better word, I feel just like a princess. I imagine I'm wearing a pink skating costume with sleeves that flutter in the breeze as I gain speed. I close my eyes and I see my grandpa standing at the edge of the rink, his eyes glinting with pride. I can feel his tender, fierce love, and I know that he's keeping me safe. Now, 25 years later, I can appreciate the wonderful things about my grandpa. And I'm deeply grateful that he helped shape me into the woman I am today. Look at me, Grandpa, I whisper, my heart filled with joy. Look, I'm still your princess.